order this meeting of the East Town Affordable Housing Trust on Thursday, March 13th. The meeting is a hybrid meeting, some on Zoom and some in the room. The meeting is being recorded and will be available on the East Town website at www.easttown-ma.gov. So thank everybody for being here. We have a guest, Mary. Do you want to say anything, Mary, to the group? Mary, is there anything you would like to say to any of us? No? Okay, that's fine. We welcome you to our meeting. First order of business is we have a quorum. We have minutes from 2 meetings to review. We have the joint select board affordable housing trust meeting that was Monday, October 7th. And we have the last meeting, which was February 13th of this year.
We'll make a motion to approve both those minutes.
Okay. Second, all right, all in favor? Elaine, I'm gonna do that all day, I'm sorry. Elaine? Yes, okay, we have unanimously approved those minutes. Okay, Rachel, the financials.
Not much has changed. We've got, our total at this point is at the bottom in light green, 1,927,376,000.
Okay.
We still have, encumbered for the rental assistance, 186,531. And the help program at 245, 487,000. Down at bottom, under expense, we've spent 39,045 at this point.
Right. And in case someone's wondering, the encumbered amount includes the full 3 years of the contract. That's why it's such a large number compared to the expenses year to date.
I do want to mention, and I did put it in my staff report, but just want to note that we have 1 more year of each contract.
Okay. So what would be the timing for when we would need to start to look at doing one of these to get the timing right?
I think we've done it. I mean, I would say we want to go out 3 months before at least, just to have smooth transition. Start the procurement again.
Right. Okay, so when did the contract expire, Rachel?
It's July 1st.
No, it's
It's an odd
No.
time.
Oh,
yeah. The housing emergency loan program is April 30th of 26, and WRAP is February 28th, 26.
Okay, so
We could probably do some sort of extension thing if we wanted to realign,
to July 1st.
Continue the April to July or something, just.
make it easy to make them July.
Just for the future, if we want everything to be on fiscal, but
That
we
would
can
be-
figure that out.
I think that's probably a good idea,
Yeah.
right? It'd make it easier to remember and to deal
I
with.
think we were always off
work.
going back all the years that, we just never aligned it to begin with.
So, maybe Rachel, if that's something that you could take on to help us to, do whatever the process is that we need to do to,
Yeah, I'll get that on my calendar
Yeah.
for next year.
yeah.
My
Yeah.
group.
Well, if the one expires 2/28, so I don't know how long it'll take to do an extension, but at the end of this year,
Yeah,
start to look at that. Is there everybody in agreement with that? Yeah, Elaine? Okay.
Yes.
and that's, unless you have any questions, that's
Okay,
basics.
yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
Inclusionary zoning discussion. That was on the agenda. Paul?
So we have this thing called inclusionary zoning in the bylaw, came out of the work from the zoning task force. Basically, it's a bylaw that requires that if a development is gonna result in 5 or more units, then this bylaw kicks in where depending on the total amount of units, a certain number of percentage have to be affordable units, deed restricted, affordable, and or workforce housing, depending on the total number, but at least 50% of the total has to be affordable, deed restricted, 80% or below AMI. So we have this on the books. It hasn't been utilized yet, nothing's triggered it yet. We anticipate there will be some projects that will be coming up soon. And so, you know, it's been there, we haven't really looked at it since we kind of got it adopted. But so again, we anticipate some things coming up, so we've been looking at the bylaw, like, okay, we got this thing in here, but how do we actually use it? So I guess there's kind of two things. I think this will go back to the zoning task force, but I think we need to look at that bylaw a little more and fine tune it. I think it's good, it does what we need to do, but it's not, it could be a little more user friendly for when it comes to smaller scale projects. It's really, in my mind, the way we set up is kind of like you get a large development, you know, 20 plus units and a larger developer. But a lot of projects and the ones that we anticipate coming up soon are going to be smaller, and it's, you know, local folks, not developers. It's just local business folks who are doing stuff and want to add some apartments and things, which is great. But it's a little onerous the way it's set up. And there's like, you know, there's some hoops you gotta jump through and some long-term monitoring. And this actually, both for the developer, obligations for the developer, the owner, and for the town. And the reason I wanted to look at this is because I don't want folks to get scared off by it and say, well, I was gonna do 5 plus units, but I'll do 4, then I'll be, you know, and then we lose out on the opportunity, you know, and then it's kind of nobody wins in that scenario. So anyway, that's kind of the preamble. But in looking at if we have some things come up in the next year, so this would be for next year, if the task force wants to take that on for May, some fine tuning for May 2026. In the meantime, if we get some projects that come in under this bylaw in the next year, we have to work with the bylaw as it is. So really, basically, the things that the developer would be responsible for if this went through would be creating
Me to go through that?
yeah, actually,
Yeah,
you have knowledge
because-
around the-
Yet the smaller projects are going to have to it's the same documents as a larger developer would have to have. So you've got an affirmative fair housing marketing plan. You've got a tenant selection plan. You've got to do the lottery, regardless of 1 unit or 64 units. It's under the state, these are under the state local initiative program. So it does have to follow those guidelines. Income certifications would have to be done. They'd have to maintain and document and develop a process for maintaining their wait list. It's a lot for 1 unit.
Right.
And it's also an expense, and the town would have to be the monitoring agent.
So what's your suggestion, kind of as a minimum?
In the short term.
So in the short term, one of the, I guess, probably the most significant thing the town can do to assist would be to provide funding to offset the cost of doing the lottery, getting all of the documentation, everything together. So that's why we want to have this discussion with trust, that housing trust funds, CPA funds could be used towards that, and Town of Dennis Trust does something similar. And so, and I think this is probably goes beyond just after we fix the bylaw, so it's kind of like something that we
Yeah,
short term.
for any small one,
maybe
they
it'll
might
go
go
on
there.
beyond that, but I just look at it from the perspective of, I don't want some good projects to get cut down just so, because, you know,
Right.
just, well, I don't want
It's
to deal with
too
all of that, and I'll just do one less, and then like I said, in that case, I don't think the town loses, developer loses, everything. So this is really just, how can we help the smaller projects where they're not professional developers, they're just. So,
But you say the Town of Dennis? Yes, did you see Dennis?
They provide $10,000 for somebody who applied. I don't know their criteria. I'm hoping to talk to them. Other than that, it's $10,000.
the thing that's tough too is there's not. Wasn't clear to me that there's a good gauge on what these things cost anyways. You know, there's a lot of estimates and things, but I think,
We're going like 14 to 24,000 potentially.
yeah, for the lottery.
Because
and
it's
everything,
the
so-
same process.
Say
as-
that again, I didn't hear. what
I'm
you said.
sorry, 14 to maybe
Is
25,000.
what you think it costs?
It's hard to say because I don't know that anyone has the data for a smaller
Yeah.
development.
Mhm.
It's the same process as a larger developer would have to go through. With, you know, so all the documentation's the same. The only thing that's different is probably the size of the lottery. Because you've got 1 unit versus 64.
But you're gonna
So-
pay that amount whether you're doing 1 unit or
Right.
65 units.
Yeah.
So it just, and again, I just look at the scale of what the project is.
Right.
I could see how somebody might get turned off by that and say, well,
Yeah,
I'll just cut it down to 4 or do whatever, you know, or not do it at all, and.
is another thing that we could offer. A fair amount of it is the documentation and forms you have to have and.
I think it's kind of a package deal when you hire a consultant to do a lottery. They get all that together. But that is something we're, you know, we are looking at what piece of it, if any, can we assist with and provide.
We could have a library of. This is what all that looks like.
Certification documents.
Yeah, all the
or-
documentation, so they could just cut and paste.
And we're also looking at, you know, there's a ready renter program that some towns participate in that you can kind of pull resources and kind of shit, so we're looking at, that's an option, that's good for Eastham as well, you know. And when we were actually, so we should back up, we asked the regional housing, I can never remember what the
Shared,
acronym is.
the shared regional housing services.
So I asked them to look at our inclusionary bylaw, and they did a really thorough review of it. We got a nice report back on it with, again, all kinds of suggestions for just overall adjustments. And then that's where a lot of these things they highlighted, like the Town of Dennis provides these services. So one of the things, what can we do in the short term to make it more useful? This is one of the recommendations, provide funding to offset costs. But we were talking with those folks yesterday, and again, it's, you know, some agencies like HAC, they'll run the lottery, but they won't do
Tenants.
the tenant selection. Some other groups do everything, the whole soup to nuts thing, but then there's price differences, so that's where it's kind of like, it's on the applicant, the developer, to do this stuff, like we can't do it for them, but then it's like, so they could go out and kind of cherry pick and say, I'm gonna have this and that, it might be save them a little bit of money, or just pay one group who's gonna do everything, so that's why it's hard to gauge exactly what the costs would be. Exactly, like we can't say like, it costs you 10 grand to do a lottery every time, because it depends on who's doing it and what the deal is that they put together, who they selected to do it, and we're not involved in that, although I guess that if we end up doing a program, that's where
We would
kind
have
of
to approve.
we'd have to
Yeah.
approve. the,
approve what they do.
Yes,
the
the same,
market plan.
whatever they submit to the state, they would submit to us.
Right.
We would have to approve it as well. And we would be in there as a monitoring agent into the affordable housing restriction.
The Ready Renter program. Do you know any more about that?
Not a lot. Mary Wagon and I have been, who's in Yarmouth, we've been playing phone tag. So I haven't had a chance to get together with her, but they use Plymouth. I want to say Housing Authority, but I don't know if that's correct. It's somebody in Plymouth maintains their ready renter list. So, every so often they go out and they open the wait list for applications. Other than that, I know that Dennis is part of that, and but there's another town, but I can never.
I think Yarmouth is also
Yarmouth and Dennis.
possibly around the inside.
In a prior life, we did a similar program. And it was very valuable to not only like this inclusionary zoning part, but if you had people in the community are looking to have an apartment and they want to rent it, it was open to individuals also, not just developers or builders. And it created a ready waiting list for people who've already been sort of pre-qualified and it was taken care of. And it really made the rental process faster. And it gave the renters, because we're trying to push towards more long-term rentals. People who maybe haven't been doing that, and been doing short-term and relying on maybe a local real estate agent or somebody to kind of get the 1 week person, to the extent they need to do that. This, if they're trying to do long-term rentals, it gave them a lot more confidence. So I think the Ready Renter program is something to explore. If you do the Ready, and this I don't know, because I don't remember from before. If you do the Ready Renter program, where you have a list of sort of pre-qualified people waiting list,
Yeah,
you still have to do the lottery.
Not if initially we would have to do a lottery
Right.
to establish the list.
Right.
A lot of people, a lot of developers at this point are moving away from a full application and documentation and income certification initially, because an applicant could be on a list for many years.
Right.
And they're in,
Right,
situation
it's not
might
a full
change.
application at all.
Yeah,
It's just sort of the.
right.
Simple stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
I would highly encourage us to look at that,
Yeah.
because, we have some funding available, and if that would make a difference, and thinking about Northeastham, where we're trying to get people who are doing some renovations to top of shop housing, along with the height bonus, if we also had a program that would help with this, every little bit we can do to add to it, so that their funding stack ends up in the black instead of the red. I think it would be great.
So the need, I should know this, but the need for going the lottery route and going down the path with the state is predicated on what, the zoning relief for the developers comes from the state, or, I mean, my understanding was if you're not using state resources, would you still have to, go the lottery route and go that
If we're not deed restricted to affordable housing.
random step?
Yeah, with the inclusionary zoning, though, that's different. There's not funding necessarily at play.
Yeah, that's
It's,
what I'm saying.
That's what I mean.
Right.
So why do we have to go that route if we're doing it as a local zoning
Why are we
ordinance?
obligated to run a
Yeah,
lottery and do all
yeah.
that kind of stuff? Well, I think that falls under the fair house.
No, well, it's, and I don't, actually, it's a very good question, and I'll have to ask the Shared Regional Housing Services Group exactly how that works, but somehow the inclusionary zoning is tied to the local action units that's a part of the state, whether they receive funding or not. It's a state agent, a part of the state programs, and they also monitor, I believe, the SHI units.
Yeah, so
So I'm not sure how it all ties together, but It's because we have to, for some reason, follow the state's local and action unit requirements.
Well, you're right. The bylaw is set up because we want these to be local actions, so we get credit. And that's the reason.
Oh, towards our 90%.
So our bylaw is set up to,
It's not,
So we voluntarily
We
Sort of
adopted that
adopted.
bylaw.
right. So, okay, to think.
um. So it's a good point to.
Well, it seems
but
like
the
we're
reason
so far
we-
away from our 10%. I mean, is that a reason to saddle ourselves with all this? Because we're never gonna get there with the 10%.
Never say never.
Well, so the bylaw does two things. It's set up to get affordable, like truly affordable units and workforce units. So you're right, the 10% goal is tough, but the only way we're gonna make any progress, I mean, we still, even if we never make the 10%, we still need units at that affordability level. So
Oh, I
that's
agree
why
with
it's
that.
set, yeah. So this is our way of kind of capturing that. So if we're gonna create those units, we at least want to get credit for them, even if it's a long time before we get to 10%, but. So that's why the bylaw is set up that way. The workforce units, again, so you could do. If you only need to do 2 inclusionary units, both units could be deed restricted. But at least one has to, so you could do one that's deed restricted and one workforce, depending on what your project is, maybe because you can get a little, get different rent for the workforce, or depending on what your financials are, but we allowed that. The workforce units, we could still also count towards our, they won't count towards our 10%. But that's why we kind of separate that, so.
So,
We still need them.
So the current bylaw on inclusionary zoning requires that at least one of the inclusionary bonus units must be deed restricted affordable,
The half of the total,
half of the total.
whatever, however many units you're obligated to.
Now, in lieu of that, they can pay it, they can give us money.
Correct, they can
Yes.
do, so the inclusionary, the first level is you're creating the units as part of the development. You can create a unit offsite. And this whole provision of, you gotta make sure, you have control of the site, and there's a lot of steps to that, or you can do a fee in lieu of, basically a payment that goes to the housing trust. And there's a calculation of how that works, but. So those are the 3 options.
Okay, so,
Okay.
I don't think so.
It's too bad because it seems going that route is a disincentive to somebody to, that wasn't feeling really altruistic, to go that route, but. Maybe that's a good use of some of our funds to offset it.
So the other thing that we should look at, the task force, and this was in the recommendation report, is our bylaw doesn't really have a lot of incentives. It's kind of set up that you have to do the units, but there's no sweeteners in there.
Right.
So I think we should go back and look at, is there a density bonus we could put in there? Are there other things that offset? So actually, if you want it, you can get more.
right,
More units.
Or whatever
Yeah.
offset. So
Like
we
if
didn't.
we cover those costs for.
Yeah, we
lottery and
didn't do
different
that
things, yeah.
because still,
I thought that was, I've been off the task force for a while, but the density bonus didn't show up as part of that.
we shied away from that just because we weren't sure how to handle that given the wastewater thing and how to account for that, not knowing what our kind of capacity was gonna be. And maybe we still don't need to have that, I think maybe we can still put the density in because it's ultimately gonna be whatever the wastewater capacity is on that site, or if there is sewer or whatever. So I think we just weren't sure of ourselves. If I went back now, if we go back, I would think we just gotta put some language in there and not try to figure out the whole thing about wastewater. It's in there, you figure
I
it,
think that's what happened,
Yeah.
is that we got nervous that if we did create a meaningful density bonus, that how would that get implemented in terms of both wastewater, and would it be accepted at town meeting that suddenly we've got more density in front of folks.
Right, got 8 units on an acre and big
Yeah.
work and gunshot at
Exactly.
that.
Yeah, we need to
But
do
it's
that.
time to re-up that, and in the current zoning proposed bylaws that are coming to town meeting in May, but just for the northeast end, we do have sort of the equivalent of a density bonus, because you can, if you are doing workforce or affordable housing, you can do an extra height, which gives you a 3rd story. And so that's the equivalent of a density bonus, and we're recommending that feature.
Need to do the same thing on the open space residential bylaw, cluster bylaw. So we had expanded it so that's available in more areas of town, but we didn't put a density. We have a bonus if you're going to go beyond the open space
Ooh,
reserve. But we should also put in that you get more units.
And the height bonus as it applies to the northeastern quarter. Does that take control of that unit that they're able to develop away from the owner? Do they have to de-restrict those units?
Those units, so to get the height bonus, the units you're creating have to be either deed restricted, affordable, or year-round rentals or workforce.
Oh, or year-round rentals.
So
Yeah.
you're
So if
You
they
can do
commit
market-
to a year-round rental, then the owner doesn't have to go through
Right, you
Correct.
can do a
that
market
process.
rate,
Okay, all right.
market rate
year-round,
unit, as long
okay.
as it's year-round rental, and then that would be a deed.
is that something you could do with the inclusionary zoning? Or,
Well, if it's a development for sale, that might be a little tricky.
right?
no, true,
I mean, you have everybody buying you one, you know.
right,
I mean, I guess you could hold one off as a rental and it would, you know, I mean.
yeah, I'm just
that's a
throwing it
good
out
question.
there.
I mean, I like the idea, but I don't know how people react to that as part of the project, but.
I think it would just make it a lot more complicated for the developer. I mean, some developers just want to build and sell.
Yeah,
Right,
And then
right,
they're
they don't wanna hang on to a rent, right,
Right.
they don't wanna hang on.
That's
to
the
it.
conversation we've had.
But the example for the northeastern quarter, that's
Right.
tremendous.
since we own the land.
That's a
yeah.
low risk,
We can-
low cost incentive
Yes.
for a private,
Yes.
you know, creation of a private unit.
So tell everybody you know to vote yes at town meeting.
Right,
So any of those options would require a deed restriction,
Yeah.
Whether it's a year-round rental or not, yeah,
right, because it's
even though it's not
basically you're.
big A affordable.
Because we're giving you a height bonus.
Right.
Which is basically permanent, so it's not like things can come and go, so
Right.
if you're gonna go to the taller building with the extra story. You're basically so those things could change over time, so maybe. You know, I have a year-round rental, but I'd rather
I just
switch
don't-
it to a deed restricted if for something, I mean, you could do that, but it has to be. One of those things has to be locked in basically. Permanently,
I don't see it, you know,
or a combination of those, it
Yeah.
could be a combination of those things.
that
Right.
scenario is not a disincentive to somebody to put a 3rd story.
Right.
I wouldn't say, I mean, you own a commercial building that you've got built-in cash flow there and that's good,
Yeah.
and that's, you know, if you
Yeah.
can't Airbnb, it's fine. I mean,
Right, you can't get a
so-
short-term rental certificate.
Right, which is fine, but that's not gonna stop somebody from doing it.
Exactly, no.
Which the inclusionary thing, and listening to you, it seems like we're gonna have to figure out a way to make it a little more appetizing, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think we said we got it on the books because we didn't wanna lose
Right.
out if
Yeah, I
if
remember that,
some. Major project
Right.
came in and all of a
Right,
sudden we're
yeah.
just caught with nothing, and we don't get
Right,
anything,
right.
but now we need to just kind of fine tune it and.
and the Northeast End also, it also includes seasonal. Worker house,
Seasonal workforce,
Yes.
so for that.
so not Airbnb, but.
Right.
And we put a limit on the size of the units, so you're not making big luxury.
Right.
Condos.
And you would, I assume it would be the same, you know, 2 beds per bedroom kind of thing, and I'm sure there would be a limitation on. How many seasonal workers you could put in a 2-bedroom condo.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that has to do with our
Yeah.
regulations. yeah.
right.
Okay. Very good, so the follow-up takeaway is, you're gonna be talking to Yarmouth about their.
Yep, Yarmouth
Ready for the
and,
program, and Dennis about their,
yeah,
and maybe bring some something. I think us moving forward with that, be very beneficial. Okay.
And
Good.
so I would say, we can come back and follow up, but then, trust would have to vote to kind of create
Fund for that.
fund it and this kind of the concept of it. And
Yeah.
then part of what we talked about was that we have to get some sort of framework around like basic application vetting process or whatever.
If they have, either of those are established programs. Cutting and pasting and borrowing their documents, is that something that the regional shared services is looking at? Similar kind of thing. We're doing the same kind of program, town to town to town, creating a library of what those program documents look like.
Yeah, that would be in their wheelhouse. What's up in the air now is if they're going to exist past June 30th. They need a certain amount of towns to commit to the program in order to move forward. So we're still
Right.
waiting on that.
Okay, thank you for that update. We'll look forward to the report and to next year's zoning. Speaking of zoning, the ADU changes. Maybe at the zoning, we have to talk about those.
It's just a short summary memo. For ADUs. So. Elaine, I can email this to you after, so you have it.
Great, thank you.
So this all stems from the state, the Affordable Homes Act, which is effective as of February. One of the major centerpieces of this is redoing the ADU regulations. I guess the big takeaway is that ADUs are now a protected use, meaning they're allowed by right. So the state says you're entitled to have one ADU by right. Our bylaw basically complies with the state. We already allow ADUs by right, except for in the Seashore District. So basically, there's not a whole lot of change, and basically, in the spirit of everything, we already comply. So we have a few tweaks we need to do. Remove the special permit requirement from the Seashore District. We are going to adjust the size limit. Right now, you can technically go up to 1,200 square feet or 50% of the gross floor area of your primary dwelling. The state standard is 900 square feet or 50%, whichever is smaller. We've had a few ADUs that have been on the larger side, and it just seems that they're not quite visually in line with what the expectations are. These are supposed to be clearly subordinate, and so we're just taking the opportunity to align with the state regulations and make that adjustment. So, and again, this is kind of being run through the zoning task force. We're looking at this. The number of ADUs, we're clarifying our bylaw. We allow one ADU per primary dwelling by right, but the way that can be interpreted is that if you have a duplex or a triplex or something, you would have one ADU for each one. And there's a discussion you could have about the merits one way or the other, but it could also open up to maybe some situations where we don't necessarily want, like we have cottage colonies, we have some housing types that could be exploited to have ADUs and kind of not what we initially were envisioning. And again, maybe there's a carve out for certain things, but for right now, the task force recommended that we just clarify the language. So it's basically one ADU per lot for the primary dwelling. So if you have that, so it's just basically locks you into one ADU per lot.
So if you have a duplex, you can have one ADU.
Right.
And I know that the task force, this is something that they want to take up again, look at next year again, we can fine tune it and tweak it if we want to make some adjustments, but, so that was the change,
And I think part of that was these changes had to happen really quickly to get them on the warrant, because the state just issued regulations and so on.
Right.
Jumped pretty quick, and that was one that we said, we can't quite figure out the right language really quickly, and the implications really quickly, so we'll put that on hold for next year.
So the state does allow us to prohibit ADUs from being short-term rentals. We already do that, so we're covered, but our bylaw says no short-term rentals, and then we go a little bit further and say the units have to be either owner occupied or year-round rental, and then we require documentation confirming that it's a year-round rental. I think we want to make sure we can keep that, and I think that is the spirit of what the state's trying to do, but the way the state regulations came out, it's kind of unclear wording and maybe some semantics about how, because it says you can't the state says you can't unreasonably restrict these ADUs beyond restricting them for short-term rental, so it's, I don't want to lose that language, and so we're hoping that when the AG reviews it, they'll understand what we're trying to do. This crosses over into the other component of this state housing act, which is the creation of the seasonal communities designation. So they did anticipate that there's going to be this carve out where seasonal communities can do things kind of above and beyond to address these unique housing needs. So I've put some language in the purpose section to kind of point to the fact that we have these housing issues. So hopefully that reinforces that, keep this language. But it's kind of like, this has been a little bit frustrating with the state, because it's like, these ADU regulations are on one track and then the seasonal communities are on another, and they're not like interchangeable right now, even though they're trying to get to the same end. So it's kind of like a debate about, is it appropriate to reference seasonal communities in your regulations? So I'm hoping this all kind of gets worked out, but in the meantime, we're keeping the language in there. Better to have it. If the AG says, Attorney General says you can't have it, we'll deal with it then.
So the final ADU regs came out this week, and the Seasonal Communities Advisory Council is going to be working on the seasonal designation guidance, and they're hoping September, October. It's a big task, so that's their timeline for their guidance, but yeah, they're on different tracks.
So basically, like I said, for the most part, our bylaw complies. It's just some minor adjustments. And the biggest one being the ADU is by right. The property owner still needs to align with setbacks and site coverage limits. So if you're maxed out on your site coverage because of your main house, you can't,
Yeah.
you can't do that. and
You
your
could do it
setbacks.
within the house, then.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do that if you're converting some of the space.
The house is that big.
And
Yeah,
if you
right.
are, if your house or the site is pre-existing non-conforming because of dimensionals to begin with, like you would have to go to zoning board for that. But again, the distinction is you're entitled to have the ADU, so like that's not the debate. It's just, can the ADU fit on the site and made within the parameters of your dimension setbacks of your septic and all that. And so the way, it's a little bit in the weeds, but what the bylaw will say is that we can't require a special permit. So you don't meet your setbacks because you're pre-existing non-conforming, you want to add the ADU. We're not saying you have to get a special permit, but you have to go to the ZBA, and they basically have to vote by a simple majority that this is not going to be detrimental. So it's a lower threshold, and the board has more latitude to kind of make some judgments on it.
And a lot less costs. Special permit requires a lot of documentation that can be.
So that's part of what, that's kind of a stage 2 is, do we require the same, right now it would be the same application process. It's just, you're not being held to the threshold for the decision. This discussion we can have about, is that a
We lower that
simpler
Yeah.
process or not?
administrative
Yeah, that's
review maybe, or
so
So
it's this balance of opening up the ability to ADU, but we're not throwing out all of the guardrails on it because it's still a factor of, you know, how does this thing affect the neighborhood?
Right.
Kind of dimensionally, but we're not, you know, I think everyone is entitled to have the unit if they can physically fit it on the site.
So the wastewater is obvious and we all knew that. As far as the ADUs by right, we voted in what I think we can all agree to is a fairly constrictive set of site coverage regulations that is going to constructively deny an awful lot of people the opportunity to do an ADU if we don't change that. You have a normal cape on a half acre, you're not gonna get an ADU. So what are we doing?
There's no change on that right now. So the ADUs are still would
And-
fall under the site coverage.
And because we're gonna be looking at some other ADU changes next year in the zoning group, maybe that's a topic that we look at.
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone is theoretically in favor of it. I mean, I certainly am, and I think every, you know, lion's share of people in town are, we all know the needs, but the rules we adopted for site coverage are gonna be disqualifying for an awful lot of properties in town.
And coupled with if we next year take up the issue of lots of minimum lot size from 40 to 20. Right,
40 to 20.
Well, the numbers are, but just looking at
something.
what the minimum lot size right now is 40,000 acre.
Oh,
So do we want to have, in the past, it's been lower, you know, decades past. So do we want to have smaller minimum lot sizes? So basically you could subdivide larger
To 1
lots into
acre.
multiple smaller lots, and those would be development. And so that does go into, if we were to do that, then I think we have to look at these site coverage percentages and make sure it's reasonable for what you could do on it, so. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's the
I mean, it's-
recommendation right now came
Yeah,
down.
it's really constructively nullifying a huge chunk of the existing normal size houses on normal size lots. I mean, unless you happen to have a walkout, you can do a walkout apartment because basements don't count, but I don't think that's what I was sort of envisioning our plan for adding, you know, safe year-round housing. It would be nice if it could be above grade.
well, and
So, I
that
mean-
might be a thing that if it's an ADU, you can go outside of
Well,
that,
that's
and
what
that
I'm
might
thinking.
come
I mean,
next
yeah,
year.
It's,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
again, I was on the zoning task force and I was pretty vocal in my opposition to some of the site coverages because absent the ADU thing, they're pretty restrictive, and inclusive of the ADU thing, it's gonna really hamper it, and the whole spirit of the state regulation is to make them more accessible and less red tape. So if you know, if you're in violation of the zoning coverage, then you're right back to needing to go to ZBA. And that defeats the purpose of the whole, let's streamline this to get more people to do it, which, I mean, it's great to see the uptick in the ADU applications you've had every year, but I just have a problem with the lot coverage relative to the reg because it's gonna definitely pour water on the budget.
we can. Zoning task force can look at that next year. Put that on our agenda. And maybe there can be exceptions. for
Yeah, I mean,
ADUs.
I maybe carve out for ADUs. I'm
Yeah.
not saying we have to blow up the zone, you know, the
Right.
lot coverage rules,
Right,
but effectively, it's disqualifying for an awful lot of properties.
So in looking at, what's existing and what's proposed. Proposing ADUs in Seashore by right, is that? How does Seashore feel about that?
Well, I went to the Seashore Advisory Council
Right, yeah,
months ago, and I think they don't think it's appropriate because it doesn't align with purpose of the Seashore District, but my way of looking at it is there's two layers here. The Seashore park itself, and that's governed by federal regulations. But the seashore park is also part of the town, which is governed by our local zoning, so. The two don't necessarily have to be aligned. Although it'd be nice if they were, because where that leaves the property owner is kind of like go at your own risk. So the town says you can do one thing. If the Park Service takes issue with that, they may, so that's not great. But my approach is we're obligated to follow the state regulations. So the local bylaw should be in line with the state regulations. It's just a quirky situation we have where we have this federal issue, so my thing is we gotta just be aligned with the state, and that discussion or that fight's gonna happen after
But
that.
it's gonna happen between the homeowner seashore.
Well, yeah, there's two
It's not
things, so,
us.
well, that's true, but I just think that's on the local, that's on the property owner level.
Right.
I think there's gonna be some agreement or something that we have to come into alignment with the federal, get on the same page, so either it's gonna be one way or the other or a compromise. But I'm just looking at it as like our schedule, and what we're obligated to do is to meet the state requirements. And I'm not, I guess, another way to say it is I'm not really paying attention to what the federal part of this is, because that's what we're not obligated to that.
Right.
So I guess the federal regs are gonna have to react to what the state is saying that the towns have to do.
Right.
But that's not our fight right now.
Right.
So
And
I'm
it's
trying to
not
get this
just
across the finish line, and then things may change, they may come back and say we gotta
Right.
make changes, but right now I'm just trying to get into alignment, get the town in alignment with the state says we need to do.
And it's not just Eastham, the other towns
Yeah, the
that
other
have
towns.
seashore are
Right.
missing, there've been things in the paper too about other towns, Truro and Washington.
Right, and I'll say that our bylaw the seashore is basically a residential zone. It allows single family duplex, and it clearly says accessory uses customary and common to residential use. So I think our bylaw is very clear, and that's been on the books forever. So I would, even before this change, I would still say ADUs would be an appropriate use. This is just highlighting this, the fact that we're doing this puts a lot of highlight on it, but I think our zoning already says that ADUs are allowed. The seashore would disagree with that, but that's been our zoning for
Yeah.
a long time now, so.
Thank you for the update. The ADUs. And we look forward
I
to,
get- Does the trust,
do we need?
I had one
Well,
other question.
I guess this is just a question, if the trust has a certain viewpoint on the ADU site coverage issue. It's appropriate if the trust wants to take a stance on that. Just put it out there. That's what the public hearing is. I should have mentioned the public hearing and all this stuff will be March 19th at the planning board meeting, so the whole point of that is to take comment and get feedback, and then if changes are appropriate, that's the process, so I'm just saying it's within the trust purview if you wanna say one thing or another.
I would like to propose that we at least consider some sort of a carve out for ADUs relative to lot size coverage that speaks to setbacks and lot coverage. Septic is immutable. You don't get a mulligan on septic, but I think in the interest of making the law work the way it's intended to, I think that in the spirit of creating affordable housing, I think something should be done in a way, if not changing the zoning law, at least making an exemption or carve out for ADUs.
Okay.
Relative to site coverage and setbacks.
Amy or Elaine, do you have any comments about that?
I think an exception might be an interesting way to move forward with that, rather than changing the zoning law, but I think that we should do whatever we can to promote encourage encourage ADUs, yes, the building of ADUs.
Good morning. This is Mary Norris. I'm sorry, earlier I couldn't get I'm not very good at this technology stuff, but I was interested in hearing what the town is doing, and I just a little comment. I just I think the National Seashore is I'm so thankful that it's there and that we have some overview of and allowing us to have access, and everyone in town have access. And thinking about the ADUs, and I understand what the gentleman was saying, we should be, together with the state, but obviously the feds, breathe heavily over there, and we're very. I love that we have our parking space there. I think that's a wonderful thing, and you don't know who's going to come in or how things are going to go. I just don't like to. I don't think that we should be in any kind of like a conflict with their interests, because their interests really are our interests as well. So I don't know how that all plays out, but ADUs are people, affordable housing. That's what you guys are trying to do. And I read some of those setbacks, and I just, I understand you're trying to keep our town, without these mega mansions and, that sort of thing. But I think when it comes to ADUs, you need to have obviously more friendly, regulations that make it in the year round. That's what we're looking for. So sorry, I just wanted to let you know that I wanted to say hello, but
Thank you. Mary, what was your last name again?
Norris.
Thank you very much.
Mary, I just want to say too, if you'd like the materials that we're looking at today, I'm happy to either email them to you or leave you a packet.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Yeah, my email, mnorrisct@yahoo.com.
How do you spell Norris? You can spell it different
Like
ways.
Chuck Norris, N as in Nancy, ORRIS.
Chuck.
I love Chuck.
mnorrisct@yahoo.com.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank
Oh,
you.
thank you so much. I appreciate what you people are doing. Thank you.
you.
So I do kind of agree with Jeff about the lot coverage, but I don't know if that's appropriate in the ADU bylaw or in the lot coverage bylaw. Because that's not open right now for, that's not on the town meeting warrant to be amended. But that's what I'm asking, which is it? If we put it in the ADU bylaw, does that somehow trump the?
I think you could do it in either one. I mean, I guess the simplest thing would be you basically just in the ADU bylaw, you
Okay.
exempt ADUs from site coverage limits. Or so this is the thing.
Yeah,
Maybe
to
not
a-
exempt
to a
it,
point,
but
yeah, right.
condition- Yeah, condition it. maybe,
Condition
not
it,
exempt it.
yeah.
So I think I just wanted the trust to be aware that, if you feel this is a concern, it's good to have this kind of officially noted.
Yes.
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to overpromise and say this would be something that gets addressed, but at least it starts the discussion so everyone's on point, and it strengthens the case of like, do we want to look at this again? Because I don't think a blanket exemption may not be the right way to do it,
right.
which is basically all we, to be honest, that's probably all we have time for at this point, to get some very basic language in there. But if we feel like it needs some more nuance and we calibrate this depending on site coverage and all that sort of stuff, that would be something that the task force could look at.
You could put words like may and can instead of shall, may exceed, but,
Right. So
under review.
My recommendation would be that I don't think it would be good to start rewiring the bylaw at this point.
Right.
Because we're just getting down to the wire, and although technically we could still do it, but if even if the warrant. We're just getting down to the wire
Right.
with the hearings, when the warrants get
Yeah.
printed, if we start to go in with things that aren't in the warrant, it gets messy on town meeting floor, so I
Yeah.
wouldn't want that, but I just wanna make sure the trust. You are,
Yeah.
you are. You know. within
Well,
your
and
purview to
the
make-
zoning
make a
task force.
Recommendation or whatever, but at least. You would say, okay,
Well,
you
so,
should look at this further next
Right.
year.
Yeah,
so here's what I maybe would propose. That Paul and I collaborate on writing a memo that would go to the planning board and the select board on this topic, and to do in it to say, besides the rationale, two things. One is we recommend the zoning task force take this up next year when they redo some of the ADU bylaw stuff, and there's other stuff that I think is on the agenda that will get them into the same area. And the second thing is to recommend to both the planning and zoning board that as they do considerations for, well, staff first and planning and zoning, as they do consideration for proposals for ADUs, they take into consideration the need for housing and the possibility of granting exceptions, or whatever the term is, to ADU development.
yeah, concerning lot
As
coverage.
constituted laws, is it a variance or is it a special permit?
Well, you
Assuming
can't,
if you,
the way it's written, you. The boards can't grant any exception to, so if you're over the site coverage and there's no way to make the numbers work. You can't do the ADU, so the board doesn't have,
Doesn't have that
the
need.
bylaw doesn't give me any latitude to do that right now. So again, that would be some of the, do we go back, do we have an exception, do we have certain guardrails or parameters around the exception? That's what we'd have to work out, but right now, like. Basically, the way this goes in for the next year until we make some changes. If you can't make the site coverage work. you
so
won't be able to
there's
do the
no
ADUs.
opportunity for relief right now
In the next year.
to get any.
Right, well, the bylaw doesn't grant that ability right now. So,
But that we would recommend that the zoning task force take that up and create the ability to create what are the right terms are, we can figure that out. So that ADUs can be by right and not be affected by the, it's like lot, maximum lot coverage and setbacks. And we
Yeah,
can-
we want,
setbacks, the issue is the site coverage, the setbacks, again, what we're doing is you have the right to have the ADU. If you have your septic capacity and your site coverage capacity. If you have a dimensional issue, your setbacks or whatever, you have to go to the ZBA, but we're not requiring that you have a lower threshold to meet than a special permit. So it's a lower bar, so.
It's still a
But you still
review.
would have to come to the ZBA, like, cause basically. What the state's trying to get at is. You shouldn't be treating the ADUs any differently than a single family home. So the reason we have that thing about going to ZBA but not special permits, if your house is pre-existing non-conforming to your property setbacks and you're doing an addition or change, you would go to the ZBA and get a special permit. If it happens, so it's the same thing, it just happens if what you're doing involves an ADU, you would still go to the ZBA just like any other project, whether you're putting a kitchen, a bathroom addition, or an ADU. But the threshold that you have to meet for an ADU will be lower than what you would do if it was just putting on in a bathroom addition or something. So it's trying to treat these things the same to the extent possible, but in that case, actually
Lower.
giving it a little more leeway, so.
So Paul, with your help, we can craft something that we would submit to the select board and planning board as part of the comment process.
Yeah, I think just something that can be put on record and then.
Sounds good.
And provide direction for the zoning task force.
Yeah.
Okay, Elaine, are you okay with that?
And
Okay, yeah,
Well, it sounds like that's, it's not gonna happen otherwise. I mean, we're not, obviously, well, Paul said you're not gonna get anything on that on the warrant, so.
For this year,
This year, yeah, it's,
Right, yeah, well,
we're just a couple.
every year. now.
Weeks
yes,
from
I mean,
printing.
It's, yeah, I think it's, like I said, I think it, I'm surprised nobody caught that in the course of crafting all this, but, you know. But yeah, so yes, is one word answer, yes.
Okay.
I guess I would just say. I have a lot of hats that I wear,
Right.
so I would say I didn't catch that. But. We're trying to put bylaws in to promote housing. We're also trying to do these things in a way that are gonna be sensitive to other issues in town that other people have about. The level of intensity in residential districts, the impact on a neighborhood, but
Right.
Yeah,
it's a
and it
balance.
wasn't, I mean, you're not the person who wrote the chart for the zoning, so I'm not putting it on.
No, I know, I'm just saying the
Yeah.
approach,
Yeah.
I guess I'm just trying to be honest with you, like, I. Thought about this beforehand, but what we're trying to do is balance, we put these site coverage limits in to address concerns. In the community about the level of
Overbuilding,
intensity
yeah.
and use of residential and ADUs, while it's a positive that we want to encourage. That also cross over into how much. Site coverage, how much intensity of space are you taking off on residential, so. Like, if we're trying to balance these things, and. Part of that approach to balancing it is
Yeah.
get some things across the finish line. See
Yeah,
what
and
works, what doesn't, and then take it, so trying to do everything, I just try to be cautious, and so I did think about this. But again, trying to balance, we got the site coverage that passed with a lot, no
Yeah,
real
in
backlash
looking-
to it, people are.
in looking at how many homes. Already were at or exceeded that site coverage, it was minimal. I mean, we were really out front, I think, in doing that to stop. People
Well-
from covering their lots completely. I mean, there were some, yes. But I think there were a lot left still that were nowhere near it. And so I kind of disagree that they're a normal sized house and a normal lot, you can't put an ADU on, because I think you can, as long as you have your septic.
Yeah, I think I can probably look back, that's the report we did for that year, I think has the data, I don't have it off the top of my head. We did look at. What the average site coverage was and lot size, so we can revisit that, so again, I didn't
Yeah.
need to get up on a huge
No, I-
tangent, but I just
yeah.
wanted you to be aware
No.
that we did look at this stuff, but it's just. It's a balanced approach, but I also want to make sure that I want to look at this again anyways, so I will. Be bringing this up with the task force, but it doesn't hurt that if the trust has a strong feeling on this, that they
Yeah.
want to make sure it's noted that.
Yeah.
Sends a signal to task force from these boards that this is.
Yeah,
it's not just-
exactly. No, I
Press the
agree.
same
I
track.
totally agree. Right.
And next year, when we were looking at the data, to your point, one of the things we did go through. When we were doing the site coverage thing was we looked at. Not only how many lots would be non-conforming, but. Would you be able to do something like a garage?
Right.
So we did some data analysis of, how much leeway. Is there built in for all the various sizes of. But what we didn't do is look at, could you build an ADU? We didn't figure in the square footage.
Requirements.
And we can
Also, in
look
the
at that.
meantime, though, I mean, if you have a garage.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have anything existing that you're gonna convert, you can do that, so you
Right.
could finish off the upstairs of your garage and apartment, the basement, yes, you can do.
Internal
If you can so I mean, there is
and
some. Capacity to do that without converting existing space without
Okay.
increasing your site coverage.
so we'll do a draft of something to send in to the select board and the planning board. Send it out to everybody. Get some comments on it and then get it in by the 19th.
Yeah.
When the public hearing is. I think, Joe, thank you for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a valid,
Yeah. it just
definitely a valid
needs to be-
concern,
Yeah.
yeah.
just move the ball.
Yes.
I had one other thing on the ADU, maximum one space.
Yeah, so
That
That's-
seems a little limiting. Like if you have a couple in an ADU.
I mean,
So you,
public transportation
It doesn't-
is limited.
Yeah,
so this is. You can put more than one space in, but the town can't require more than one space.
oh, I see. Okay,
We have, well,
so,
it's a maximum one required.
okay,
This is a. This makes a lot more sense off Cape where.
Yeah.
There's public transportation and this kind of gets into the whole MBTA community thing where it's like. If you're putting a burden on, like, you have to put extra parking when you don't really need it, again, down here, it's a little. Different situation where most people do have two cars and it's kind of logical to say. If you're building an ADU, you should have two spaces for two cars, because that's what you're gonna have.
yeah,
So this is where the state isn't quite in alignment with everywhere, and that's. Where, so we can't, but basically we can't require, you can put as many parking spaces as you want. But we can't say you have to put more than one space per unit.
I'm looking at our time and our agenda, we're over time. Town meeting warrant article review, we talked about.
I think we covered a lot
Yeah.
in this
Last time,
discussion.
this time, I think we covered most of that.
the seasonal community designation, that's big.
Yeah,
And thank you for including that, it's a nice little,
So
so on,
most of the housing ones are the zoning activity that Paul, we talked about at this meeting last meeting,
right,
and now the ADU stuff. I don't think there's anything else that's. related to
the
housing.
seasonal designation,
Yes.
and the 580 Massasoit CPA request.
Right.
For funds to, finish the building for the two housing units there.
Okay. All right, Rachel, we have your report.
Yes.
Is there anything that we need to particularly take action on or?
No,
No.
not at this time.
Take a look at that. Thank you for highlighting those town meetings.
yeah, that's great.
That's good.
Yeah, the, select board, well, Amy, I think you're looking at that on Monday night.
Yes.
The warrant.
The whole town meeting from here on out.
I do have a meeting set up this week with potential candidate for a vacancy.
Awesome,
And depending on how that goes and whether they're interested, then we'll do a formal
okay,
meeting with.
That'd be
the
great.
search committee.
yeah, search committee, Yeah.
Okay. All right,
super.
anything else before the group? Elaine, anything else?
Nothing from me at the moment.
Okay,
Be well.
well, yeah.
Thank you very much. Everybody else too. I'm feeling
Everything-
fine right now, so.
Good, all right,
Thank you.
Jeff?
Quick question. And I apologize for missing the meeting in the library. Is there a home rule petition for a transfer tax on property?
Yes,
And would that have would the funds generated for that, any of it be, is it already sort of in the general? or
we're
any of that
putting,
influence us, I guess?
yes, we're putting wastewater and housing as the two primary recipients of those funds, because they're inextricable, they're linked.
Right.
So those are gonna be our things that we're gonna say that money will be used for.
And it's a 1% transfer tax on a buyer of residential? or
Correct.
Commercial or both?
Residential,
And what size? All?
all but over $1 million, and that last week when we met, we talked about maybe doing it 1% on everything. Or doing a higher percentage on over certain number. Because, when you start to go over $1 million, you're gonna get a lot fewer properties, obviously. And so maybe going a higher percentage to kick, so we haven't really flushed out exactly what it's gonna say yet. We've gone both kind of extremes. But that being said, it's a home rule petition, and I think some other towns have done it before, and it hasn't gone anywhere. And the state tried to do it under the housing,
Seasonal communities.
yeah, seasonal communities, and it didn't fly. So Julian Sear came to our meeting a couple weeks ago and said, really pushed, please get it on your warrant so that it shows that there's interest. Because no matter what we say in our home rule petition, they're gonna probably change it. Just like the short-term rental tax. Like we tried for how many years to get that passed as a home rule petition, and finally the state made their own and, took their cut. So we'll see, but they really want us to put something on to show the state that we need it. And people want it, so. But stay tuned Monday to see what,
So that'd be discussion Monday.
Monday discussion, yeah, on whether,
At the select board meeting?
yeah.
Okay.
Because we'll talk about, because it's already on our draft warrant. But we're playing with the numbers still.
So a home rule petition is proposed by the select.
Yeah, and then it has to go for town meeting.
Okay.
Has to pass town meeting, and then we send it to the state, and then, under the idea of a home rule petition, the town approves it, they should let us do it, but it never works out quite that smoothly, as you know. It has to get vetted by them, and then it's something usually the towns can opt into, like the short-term rental tax. So it'd be another, yes, yes. Yeah, for home rule.
Very good.
All right.
I mean, for a first time home buyer, who's paying 500 grand for a house and has a 97% mortgage, it's $5,000 they probably don't have.
Well, that's why it's a million, they wouldn't have anything. It's only the amount over $1 million, then.
Oh, is that?
Yes,
that
that's
get
how-
decided or?
No,
oh,
But that's what that's in the draft right now.
oh,
So,
it is.
yeah, the latest draft anyway, $1 million, so anything over $1 million. So even if it's $1,500,000, it's only the 5,000, then that would be added,
Oh, it's only 5, okay.
if it's 1%. But if you go a higher percent,
of the amount over $1 million.
Oh,
the
first-
percent
oh, the
over $1
first
million
million
is exempted,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So-
So
That's
scenario
a
doesn't
reason
exist. I
to
got
do
you.
that, but then maybe bump the percentage up, so that's what I'm guessing will happen. Rich, wrote the draft with proposing over $1 million, well, maybe we should bump that percentage up, I think, to 2 or 3%. So anything over $1 million then has that higher.
Okay, so that's not. Okay, well, that's.
And that-
not reading, okay,
Yeah.
that, well, I mean, that doesn't affect,
Correct,
that doesn't affect our affordable candidates.
right,
in this-
and even if it's a $1.1 million house, yeah, it's only on that 100,000 then that. Okay.
Yeah, and the state, I think. The state proposed something like that a couple of years. ago.
They did, it was a 3% over $1.5 million, I think,
Yeah,
for the
yeah.
seasonal
I think it
communities.
was 2, but whatever.
Oh,
yeah,
2,
but it was
maybe,
close.
okay,
It was
yeah.
close, yeah.
To not do it, yeah, I know. We know how you feel about them.
I am a proletarian voter.
All right, anything else for the good of the group? Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor, aye. Thank you very much. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.